A rare vintage was poured, just not for the right guest. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axen. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment and let me know. I always look forward to reading your thoughts. Now, let's begin. It was a quiet Tuesday when it happened. Quiet being the kind of quiet you only get when Nero Wolfe is halfway through a bottle of 1945 Chateau Latour and Fritz is serenely roasting a duck in the kitchen. I was in the office, feet on the edge of my desk, trying to decide whether a new pair of brown Oxfords I'd seen on Madison were worth the sting to my paycheck, when the doorbell rang. Now, normally, interruptions before lunch are reserved for the milkman, the grocer, or Kramer, with steam coming out of his ears. But this chime had a different tone, too eager, too polite. I swung the door open to find a woman standing on the stoop, tallish, impeccably dressed, with a fur stole that hadn't seen mothballs in decades and eyes sharp enough to dice an onion. "My name is Florence Avery," she said, her voice measured but laced with nerves. "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. Immediately." That word, immediately, has no jurisdiction within the walls of our brownstone, unless someone is bleeding on the carpet. Still, I had to give her credit for walking in like she'd already paid for the privilege. "I'm Archie Goodwin," I offered, stepping aside. "Come on in and prepare to be disappointed." Mr. Wolfe's feelings about spontaneity are best described as homicidal. She swept in without so much as a thank you. She had presence, I'll give her that. The kind of presence that makes you look twice, then check your wallet. In the office, Wolfe didn't lift his head from the book he was reading, A History of Burgundy's Second Growths, a real page-turner until I cleared my throat with theatrical exaggeration. "A Miss Florence Avery to see you," I announced. "Says it's urgent. Also, she's wearing mink and distress." Wolfe sighed and placed a yellow ribbon in his book. "Bah, put her in the red chair, and don't bungle the introductions." Miss Avery didn't sit at first. She paced for a moment, then abruptly turned to face Wolfe as though she'd remembered something she hated. "Mr. Wolfe, I believe my brother is being blackmailed, or worse. And I'm afraid I'm the reason why." That got his attention. Wolfe looked up, slowly, as if adjusting to a change in temperature. "You are the reason your brother is being blackmailed," he repeated. "I think so," she said. "But I don't know how, or by whom. I only know that something is very, very wrong." Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't praying, just economizing. Then he opened them and nodded at me. I got the signal to proceed. "Start from the beginning," I said. "Who's your brother, and what kind of trouble is he in?" "Gregory Avery. He imports wine. Mostly French. He's particular about quality. A little obsessive, some would say. Lately he's been erratic, distracted. He cancelled 2 shipments from Domaine Lucienne, without explanation, and this morning I found a bottle of cheap Argentinian Malbec in his apartment. Screw top. He wouldn't even let that stuff in his house." That was enough to make Wolfe grunt. It was the kind of grunt that meant, "This may be beneath me, but I'm listening." "Go on," Wolfe said, folding his hands across his prodigious waistline. Florence sat down at last. "Last night Gregory was supposed to come to a private tasting. I organized. I run La Cave Privée on East 78th, a curated wine club. He never showed. This morning I got a text. Just one word, mistake. I went to his apartment. It was unlocked, he wasn't there. And that ridiculous bottle was on the counter, as if someone left it deliberately." "And you believe," Wolfe said, "that this odd behavior is the result of blackmail?" She hesitated. "There's a woman. He's been seeing her, Marta Kellogg. She used to be a sommelier but lost her credentials 2 years ago, after a scandal in Florence." "Which Florence?" I asked. "The city or the woman sitting across from me?" She didn't smile. Wolfe gave me a side-eye, then addressed her directly. "What makes you believe you are the cause of this entanglement?" She breathed in. "Because 6 years ago I was in Italy. I was involved in a wine forgery scheme, briefly. I was young, naive, and didn't fully understand what I was involved in. But if someone learned about it, if Marta did, it could be used to destroy Gregory's business." I whistled. "Wine forgery? That's a new one. What did you do? Switch a bottle of Barolo for grape soda. It wasn't a joke, she said tightly. Doctored labels, faked vintages. Enough to bring shame to an entire generation of winemakers. Wolfe's lips curled in disdain. Profaning the vine is no small sin. She turned to him, eyes fierce. If Gregory is in danger because of me, then I will pay you whatever it takes. Find out who's behind this. Wolfe closed his eyes again. Not in retreat, but in consideration. The air thickened. I knew what he was weighing: time, interest, disruption, the sanctity of the brownstone, and perhaps the insult to wine itself. He opened his eyes. I will accept your retainer. Mr. Goodwin will visit your brother's apartment. You will remain available. Do not take it upon yourself to investigate further. She exhaled, visibly relieved. Thank you. As I walked her to the door, she paused. Archie, my brother is proud. If he's fallen into something ugly, he won't admit it. Be careful, I nodded. That's what I do. Carefully uncover ugly things. When I returned to the office, Wolfe had already picked up his book again. Well? I asked. Without looking up, he muttered. No one buys Argentinian Malbec by mistake, Archie. It is always deliberate, and almost always regrettable. I headed for the coat closet. The case had officially begun, and this one, I suspected, would be aged to complexity and finished with a bitter note. Wolfe didn't say another word as I left, which for him is the closest thing to a pep talk. I grabbed my coat, hat, and notebook, my holy trinity, and headed out into a bright but cold Manhattan morning, the kind that makes you grateful for dry socks and a clean conscience. I had neither certainty nor direction yet, just a bottle of bad wine and a sister with a voice full of guilt. But that's usually enough to get the wheels turning. Gregory Avery's apartment was in a renovated brownstone on West 93rd, the kind of place that tried hard to look bohemian, but had a doorman who knew your dog's name and judged you for tipping in singles. The lobby was marble-tiled and smelled faintly of eucalyptus and insecurity. I gave the name, got the nod, and took the elevator up to the 4th floor. The door to 4C was still unlocked, which was either sloppy or strategic. I stepped inside and stood still. The place was clean, tastefully masculine, and more or less untouched since Florence's visit, which meant nobody had come back to cover their tracks. The bottle of Malbec was still on the kitchen counter like an accusation. I picked it up, turned it in my hand. Bodega Los Robles, Mendoza, 2009 Teeb, fruity and offensively cheerful. The kind of wine you served at a barbecue where someone always brought a guitar. I noted 2 empty glasses in the sink. One rinsed, one not. That was interesting. If Gregory had drunk alone, why rinse only one? I poked around the kitchen drawers. Nothing much except a corkscrew with a chipped handle and a wine inventory ledger tucked under a stack of mail. I flipped it open. Neat columns, dates, bottle counts, handwritten notes in tiny cursive. But something caught my eye. 2 entries from last week had been scribbled over, replaced with cancelled, C. Marta. One of the lines was for a 1947 Cheval Blanc. That's not the kind of wine you cancel lightly. I sat on the arm of the couch and flipped open my notebook. I jotted down the wine entry, the untouched bottle, and the mental note to find out more about this Marta Kellogg. Credentials lost in Florence, involved with Gregory, and possibly holding the knife over his career. If Florence's story held water, she had motive and proximity, and if there's one thing Wolfe drilled into me, it's that motive plus proximity equals priority. As I stood up to leave, I noticed a smear on the edge of the doorframe, near the coat rack. I stepped closer. Lipstick. A pale plum shade, almost mauve, rubbed faintly against the white paint. I snapped a photo with my phone and added it to the growing list of question marks. Back in the street, I made a few calls. Lon Cohen from the Gazette owed me 2 favors and a bottle of scotch, so I cashed in one and asked him to dig up anything on Marta Kellogg, professional history, scandal details, anything that didn't sound like a press release. Then I rang up Saul Panzer, just to let him know his name was warming up on deck. When Wolfe started sniffing blackmail and forgery, Saul was the bloodhound you wanted leashed and ready. It was just after noon when I got back to the brownstone. Fritz met me at the door with a raised eyebrow that asked, "You're back before lunch?" I shrugged and handed him the bottle of Malbec like it was evidence from a crime scene. "For display purposes only," I said. "No drinking unless you're trying to punish yourself." Wolfe was in the office, predictably, rereading the same paragraph of some wine encyclopedia, with a scowl that implied the author had gotten Burgundy all wrong. I dropped into the red chair. Gregory Avery's apartment was unlocked, tidy, and suspiciously curated. A cheap bottle of red was the only thing out of place. 2 glasses in the sink, one rinsed, one not. Looks like a guest came over, stayed long enough to open something awful, and left through the front door. Wolfe tilted his head, not looking up. "Was your presence observed?" "I kept it clean," I said. "No neighbors, no super. If someone's watching, they weren't watching closely." He grunted. "And the guest?" "My money's on Miss Kellogg. And I'm not just following the scent of scandal." The wine log at Gregory's place had 2 big-ticket cancellations marked C. Marta. One of them was a Cheval Blanc. 47, that's a sin, Wolfe. He nodded faintly, like a judge hearing an unpardonable crime. The implications of financial coercion are becoming clearer. I dropped the notebook on his desk. "I'd like to find Miss Kellogg and ask her what she does with a screw-top bottle on a Tuesday night." "You will," he said, "but not yet. First, I wish to speak with Florence again. She did not tell us everything. You will call her and arrange her return this afternoon." I raised an eyebrow. "You expect her to show up again willingly? She's motivated." "Guilt is an excellent motivator. So is fear." I made the call. Florence sounded unsurprised, almost grateful, like she'd been waiting for Wolfe to summon her like a magician in a dinner jacket. She agreed to return at 3. That gave me a little time, so I dug into Marta Kellogg's background. Lon came through with a brief history that read like a bad novel. Former sommelier at a high-end trattoria in Florence, Italy. Ousted after a series of wine ratings were traced to doctored bottles. No charges filed, but her career fizzled faster than a cheap Prosecco. She returned to the States 2 years ago, bounced through a few consulting gigs, then landed, guess where? Le Cave Privé, Florence's wine club. I showed Wolfe the report just as Fritz wheeled in lunch, braised rabbit with chestnuts and glazed carrots, plus a bottle of something Wolfe deemed marginally tolerable. I waited until he was halfway through his first helping before asking the obvious. "Do you think Florence and Marta were in it together? Forgery ring, revenge." He dabbed his lips. "Perhaps once, but no longer. Miss Avery is trying to suppress something. Miss Kellogg, I suspect, is trying to leverage it. The difference between remorse and opportunism, Archie, is usually a bank statement." At precisely 3 o'clock, the bell rang. I let Florence in again. She wore a different coat, same eyes. Wolfe waited, hands folded, looking at her like she was an uncorked magnum with a weak seal. "You didn't mention," he said without preamble, "that you and Miss Kellogg work in the same establishment." Florence froze for a second. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to Wolfe. "No," she admitted. "I didn't." "Why?" She took a seat slowly. "Because it wasn't relevant." "Everything is relevant," Wolfe said sharply. "You are her employer?" "She's freelance. Technically, she's a tasting consultant. She works 2 nights a week, runs private pairings. Gregory met her through the club." "And you disapproved," Wolfe said. "I didn't trust her. But Gregory was infatuated. She had charisma, knowledge, and she made him feel clever." Wolfe nodded, eyes narrowing. "So, you suspect Miss Kellogg learned of your past misdeeds and is now blackmailing Gregory?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I think she discovered the records, or someone told her, and now she's threatening to go public, ruin his business unless he complies." "Complies with what?" I asked. "Money? Influence? Wine shipments?" Florence hesitated. "I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. He only said he'd made a mistake and that he had to fix it quietly." Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. A long pause followed. The only sound was the faint ticking of the office clock and the distant clatter of cutlery from the kitchen. "I want you to find her," Wolfe said suddenly, eyes still closed. "Miss Kellogg, speak with her. Do not accuse. Do not disclose. Observe." "Right," I said, rising. "Just a friendly chat about wine and regret." He opened one eye. "And Archie, don't drink anything she offers." I tapped the brim of my hat. "I like my wine vintage, not venomous." I left the brownstone with one name, one mission, and a feeling that somewhere between a ruined bottle and a ruined past, someone had decided that taste wasn't nearly as important as control. It took me less than an hour to locate Marta Kellogg, thanks to a combination of Fritz's meticulous calendar keeping and the one thing that always works faster than a bloodhound, with caffeine: an assistant who takes his notes seriously. According to La Cave Privé's website, flawlessly designed and smug about it, Marta was scheduled to lead a private tasting that evening at 7. Lucky for me, the club had a brick-and-mortar setup on East 78th, tucked between a boutique cheese shop and a tailor who believed lapels should never change width. I arrived at 6:45. The lights were low, the door locked, and the interior smelled like vanilla candles and old oak, charming if you like the kind of ambiance that costs $50 a whiff. A small brass plaque read "Private Tasting in Session, Entry by Appointment Only." I rang the bell and waited. After 30 seconds, the door opened a crack. A woman appeared, lit from behind by a golden pendant light. She had black hair swept up in a loose chignon, a mole near the edge of her jaw, and a mouth shaped like a question mark, not in design, just in the way it twitched slightly, as if always on the verge of asking what you really thought of her. "We're not open to the public," she said, voice low and unhurried. "I'm not the public," I replied. "I'm Archie Goodwin. I have questions, not a corkscrew." Her brow lifted by a millimeter. "You're from the press." "Nope, from Mr. Wolfe." That got her attention. She pushed the door open further, just enough for me to see rows of tasting tables, each set with polished glasses, linen napkins, and cards printed with varietal names and pairing notes. Very high-end, very curated, very anxious to impress. "You're early," she said, stepping back. "You have 15 minutes. Then my clients arrive." I followed her in. Her heels clicked precisely. Not too fast, not too slow. She led me to a side room that looked like a library someone had abandoned for wine. She gestured to a leather chair. I took it. She remained standing. "So," she said, "what does the great Nero Wolfe want with me?" "For starters," I said, "he'd like to know how you spend your evenings with Gregory Avery, particularly the one where a bottle of Bodega Los Robles turned up in his apartment like a dead mouse on the doorstep." Her face didn't twitch. "I like Argentine wines. That one you left behind says otherwise." She crossed her arms. "I didn't leave it. He didn't drink it." She shrugged. "Maybe he bought it on impulse. Men do strange things under stress, especially if they're being blackmailed," I said casually. That was a calculated nudge. Her reaction wasn't explosive, but I clocked it. Her right eye narrowed a fraction before her posture stiffened. She masked it well, but I've spent enough hours watching suspects under Wolfe's microscope to recognize the scent of panic with a touch of polish. "Blackmail is ugly," she said smoothly. "Are you suggesting I'd stoop to that? Are you denying it?" "I'm saying I don't appreciate the insinuation." "Miss Kellogg," I said, leaning forward, "I've got 2 glasses in a kitchen sink, 1 cheap bottle on the counter, and a sister wringing her hands because she thinks her past is catching up to her through you. Now, either you've got a neat explanation, or I go back to Wolfe and tell him you flinched." She met my gaze, unblinking. Florence always assumed I was beneath her, too provincial, too desperate. But she forgets that reputations fall faster when they've been artificially lifted. That confirmed it. There was history here, and not the kind that ends with hugs and scrapbooks. "I didn't threaten Gregory," she said, voice lowering. But he knew something was wrong. He found records, old files from Florence's time in Italy. They were in the cellar archives here. I don't know who left them there, but he read them, And he panicked. I nodded. Why call it a mistake? Because he realized his sister's scandal could ruin his brand. He built his name on honesty, on refinement. If the press got wind that Florence helped run a forgery ring, allegedly, I added. She smirked. Sure, allegedly, Gregory would lose everything. He started pulling back, cancelled orders, avoided suppliers. He told me he needed time to think. Then he disappeared. I frowned. Disappeared? You haven't seen him? Not since Sunday night. That wasn't the timeline Florence gave us. She'd seen him the night before last, or said she had. Either she was lying, or Miss Kellogg was. Did he seem scared? I asked. She hesitated. Not scared. Angry. Like someone had forced his hand and he didn't know how to retaliate. Who else knew about the records? I didn't even know they existed until he showed me. They weren't in plain sight. Someone put them there deliberately. Maybe to remind Florence, or maybe to bait Gregory. And you just happened to be there when he found them. I didn't plant them, if that's what you're thinking. I wasn't thinking it, but now I was. I checked the time. Her clients would be showing up any minute and Wolfe had made it clear. Observe, don't accuse. So I stood. Thanks for the chat, I said. I'll let Wolfe know you've upgraded your collection files and all. She smiled, faint and humorless. Tell him to enjoy his Latour while it lasts. Some vintages sour unexpectedly. I made a mental note. That wasn't just metaphor. That was a warning. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms with Theodore, muttering something Latin at a struggling orchid that refused to bloom on command. I waited him out in the office, scribbling notes and connecting dots that didn't quite want to touch. When he came in, he headed straight for his chair and poured himself a glass of beer. Well, he said. I gave him the rundown. Marta's version of events matched Florence's in structure, but not in tempo. And the part about the records surfacing in the cellar of La Cave Privée added a whole new wrinkle. She says Gregory found the files and reacted badly, I said. And now he's off the radar. Wolfe frowned. Has he been reported missing? Not yet. Florence hasn't said anything. Maybe she knows where he is. Maybe she's hiding him. Phew. She's not capable of concealment. Her conscience is louder than her common sense. He swirled the beer in his glass and stared at the bubbles like they owed him an explanation. If these records were placed intentionally, he said, then someone knew Gregory would see them. Someone wanted him rattled, possibly to manipulate him into withdrawal or compliance. I added, indeed, it is not blackmail for money. It is coercion for control. I stood and crossed to the bookshelf, flipping through the ledger. Florence had left with us. Wolfe hadn't looked at it since yesterday. But I had a hunch. There was a note scribbled next to a cancelled tasting event for Villa Andretti, a boutique vineyard out of California. It read, postponed by G. No explanation. I turned and held it up. You think this could be about more than Florence's past? Maybe someone's trying to push Gregory out of the industry. Create a vacuum. Wolfe's lips thinned. An inelegant strategy, but feasible. Then the phone rang. Fritz answered in the hall. I watched his shadow move, then stiffen. He appeared in the doorway a moment later. It's Miss Avery, he said. She's in distress. She's in distress. She's in... Wolfe's expression didn't change, but I knew he'd already made his next move. Put her through, he said. Fritz did. Florence's voice came through the receiver, brittle and frayed. Mr. Wolfe. I found something. In Gregory's cellar. A second bottle. It wasn't wine. It was a vial, hidden in the box with the Malbec. Wolfe leaned forward. A vial of what, Miss Avery? I don't know, she said. But it had a tag. Just one word. Which was, remind. Wolfe didn't move, but I could see his brain pulling threads together faster than a spider on amphetamines. He closed his eyes, not out of weariness, but to remove distraction. The room felt heavier, and it wasn't just the radiator. Miss Avery, he said, voice like a chisel. Under no circumstances are you to touch that vial again. Do not attempt to open it. Do not dispose of it. Seal the box, lock it, and remain at your residence until Mr. Goodwin arrives. Am I clear? Yes, she whispered. I didn't mean to cause. You did not cause anything. Now remain still and available. He hung up without a goodbye and turned his head slowly toward me. Archie. Yes, sir. Go immediately. Retrieve the vial. Photograph its contents and container. Bring it here in a sealed envelope. Wear gloves. Understood, I said, already heading for the coat closet. Anything else? Gas mask. Tongs. He didn't dignify that with a response, but the line of his mouth suggested this was no longer a curiosity. Whatever that vial contained, it had shifted the gravity of the situation. I made it to Florence's place on East 84th in 20 minutes flat, thanks to a merciful lull in traffic and a cabbie with a moral disregard for yellow lights. Her building was pre-war, quiet, upscale in the way old money prefers, no flash, just polished brass and silence. She buzzed me in before I could finish pressing the button. She answered her apartment door with both hands wringing a silk handkerchief. No makeup this time. And her eyes were rimmed with a sleepless kind of panic, the kind that makes people confess things they haven't done yet. It's in here, she said, leading me through the living room to a back hall I hadn't seen before. I keep some of Gregory's overflow inventory here, mostly for my private tastings. He sent over a few boxes last week, said they were unsorted. The cellar was a temperature-controlled closet with racks along the wall and 2 crates at the base. She pointed to the left one. It was at the bottom, under a layer of packing straw. I was looking for a 203 Syrah when I felt something shift and found the bottle. At first I thought it was just an odd label. Then I saw it wasn't sealed for drinking. I knelt beside the crate. There it was, a small dark glass vial, no bigger than a lipstick tube, capped in copper and tagged with a crisp, typewritten label. Remind. I didn't touch it. I photographed it from 3 angles, then used the leather gloves I'd brought to gently wrap it in one of her tea towels and slide it into an evidence envelope I'd borrowed from Wolfe's desk drawer on my way out. Some habits pay off. Did you tell anyone else you found it? I asked. No. I was too frightened. Good. Keep it that way. I left her with strict instructions not to mention it to anyone, not even Gregory if he suddenly reappeared with an apology and a vintage Bordeaux. She nodded mutely, still staring at the crate like it might shift again and whisper something damning. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in the office. He was seated, as always, hands laced over his stomach. The beer glass was untouched, and the orchid room door was closed. He was focused. I placed the envelope on his desk. He didn't reach for it. Describe it. Small vial, brown glass, copper cap. No markings on the glass itself. The tag was white card, typed, single word. Remind. It wasn't hidden too carefully, but not in plain sight either. Tucked beneath packing straw in a wine crate. He frowned. What color was the contents? Couldn't see through the glass. Opaque. He reached over, picked up the envelope, and studied it like it was a telegram from Nemesis. Then, surprisingly, he slid it into the top drawer of his desk, without opening it. Your thoughts? He asked. I shrugged. Could be a prop. Could be real. But if it's real, it doesn't sound like poison. Who labels a murder weapon remind? Sounds more like a message than a method. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. A provocation. Possibly a trigger. I sat. You think it was planted for Florence to find? He didn't answer immediately. Then, it is far more likely that it was intended for Gregory, but he never came to retrieve it. And Florence, unwittingly, became the substitute audience. Could be the point, I said. A message left in his wine stash that he was too spooked or too missing to discover, and now she's caught in its echo. Wolfe steepled his fingers. It may not be chemical at all. The vial could be symbolic. An item from the past, repackaged, something from Italy, or something that mimics the aesthetics of a threat. But yes, possibly something from the forgery ring, or its consequences. The phone rang again. This time I answered. Goodwin. It was Lon Cohen, sounding like a guy who just found out his favorite steakhouse was actually a front for tax evasion. Archie, you owe me, big time. I'm good for it. What have you got? Marta Kellogg didn't just get fired in Florence. She was quietly investigated by Interpol for ties to a fake vintage operation that targeted collectors across 3 countries. No charges, but one of her associates, Pietro Luzzati, died in custody before he could testify. Suspicious circumstances. And get this, Luzzati's alias when he traveled to the States. Don't keep me in suspense. Gregory Smith. I blinked. Avery's real name? No. But close enough to raise an eyebrow. I thanked him and hung up. Wolfe watched me, expression unreadable. Interpol had eyes on Marta, I said. And one of her co-conspirators used the name Gregory Smith, died under mysterious circumstances before trial. Which means she either adopted the name Gregory by coincidence, or deliberately sought him out for the echo. Or, I added, he sought her out. Wolfe nodded slowly, fingers drumming the edge of his chair arm. 2 possibilities emerge, he said. First, that Marta Kellogg is continuing or reviving her prior operation targeting Gregory, due to his name, his business or his proximity to Florence. Second, that someone else, possibly Florence herself, is manipulating both Marta and Gregory, with selective truths and planted evidence. Which way are you leaning? Neither yet, Wolfe said. But we must provoke clarity. He reached for the phone and dialed Saul Panzer's number. In under 30 seconds, Saul was on the line. I require your assistance, Wolfe said without preamble. Le cadre privé. Discreet observation. 2 subjects, Marta Kellogg, and any visitors bearing cases, crates or documents. Begin tonight. Report tomorrow. He hung up, satisfied. Then he turned to me. You will return to Miss Kellogg tomorrow. Ask about Pietro Luzzati. Press nothing, but observe closely. Her reaction is the next step. I nodded. And Florence? Leave her be. For now. As I rose to go, Wolfe finally opened the top drawer, extracted the envelope, and placed it gently atop the blotter. The vial sat there, innocuous and quiet. But somehow, it changed everything. I woke the next morning with a headache that wasn't hangover-related, but still had the same dull persistence, like a wine cork that refused to budge. The image of that little vial sat in my brain like it had signed a lease. Remind, not poison, not a confession, just one word with 100 directions. After breakfast, soft-boiled eggs, toast and a small lecture from Fritz on the superiority of German butter. I dressed for another appointment with Miss Marta Kellogg. Wolfe had instructed me to make no accusations, ask no leading questions, just drop a name, Pietro Luzzati, and let gravity do the rest. It wasn't my preferred style, but Wolfe wasn't looking for fireworks. He was looking for fracture lines. The wine club didn't open until noon, but I wasn't aiming for customer hours. This time, I called ahead. She answered with a clipped yes that carried all the warmth of a half-frozen corkscrew. It's Archie Goodwin. I'd like to see you again. A pause. You found something, didn't you? Maybe. I'd like to ask you about it in person. Another pause. Fine. Noon. I have 30 minutes. Click. It was the kind of tone you get when someone's trying to sound brave, but their nerves are clenching under the weight of something sharp. I headed out just before 11, early enough to stroll the Upper East Side in case I needed to lose a tail, though it was more likely I'd get hit by a stray stroller than shadowed by a gunman. Still, Wolfe has trained me well. You never let your shoes get too comfortable during a case. Marta let me in through the same side door. The tasting room was darker than before. Shades pulled halfway down like it was mourning something. She wore the same navy blouse from yesterday, which told me her laundry routine was taking a back seat to more urgent concerns. She didn't offer me a chair this time, just leaned against a barrel table and waited. "Well," she asked, "have I been poisoned in the press already?" "No," I said, stepping in. "But your name did come up in some interesting files, particularly connected to a man named Pietro Luzzati." That got her. It was subtle, just the blink that lasted too long, like her eyes needed a reboot. "I haven't heard that name in years," she said too evenly. "Funny," I said. "He died in custody. Italy, right before he was supposed to talk about a wine forgery ring." She exhaled through her nose. "You're wasting your breath, Mr. Goodwin. I'm not in the forgery business anymore. You were." Her lip curled. "I was 25, broke, and working in a Florentine cellar that paid me an expired salami. Pietro was charming, ambitious and dangerous in the way all the best bad decisions are. He needed someone who could speak English, navigate a tasting room, and dress a bottle in authenticity. I was flattered. And later, I was scared. I quit when it got out of hand. By then, the operation was already under watch. I got out clean." "He did." "And Gregory Avery?" I asked. "Where does he fit into this charming tale of fraud and flirtation?" She looked at me hard. "He reminded me of Pietro. His name was close. Not just his name, his devotion to the details. The way he looked at a label like it was scripture. When we met, I thought maybe it was a test, like someone had sent him to find out if I'd returned to the game." "Had you?" "No," she said flatly, "but I let him believe I might. I wanted to see what he'd do with the suspicion." I blinked. "You tested him." "I wanted to know if he'd sell me out, or if he'd try to join me." "And which did he do?" "He ran. After he found those files, told me he was finished with me. With Florence. With everything." She straightened up. "Someone left those records for him to find. Not me. Maybe Florence. Maybe someone else. Why? To scare him. To remind him." There it was again. Remind. I pulled out my notebook and flipped it shut with a satisfying thump. "You say you're out of the business. I'd like to believe you. But the thing is, someone's doing some very delicate manipulation here, and whether you're running the game or just a chess piece, Wolfe's going to find out." She gave a tired smile. "Tell him to be quick about it. The wine world is small. But revenge, that never stays bottled for long." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting. He'd eaten lunch without me, spiced lamb, judging by the scent that still lingered. I gave him the rundown, word for word. When I got to the part about Marta testing Gregory, he interrupted. "That confirms it," he said. "Confirms what?" "She is neither the initiator nor the executor. She is reactive, observant, but not dominant." "You think she was framed?" "I think she was placed," Wolfe said, "like a decoy in a trap designed for someone else." I frowned. "Then who's setting the bait?" He looked at me. "That is our next step." At that moment, Saul Panzer arrived. He didn't knock. He knows his way in. Wolfe waved him to the yellow chair. "Well?" Wolfe asked. Saul nodded. "Marta Kellogg received a visitor last night. Tall man, 30s, thin build, nervous energy. Didn't enter through the front. Used a service entrance. They spoke in the tasting room for 15 minutes. No wine was poured. No items exchanged visibly. He left quickly. You get a name." "License plate," Saul said, handing me a slip. "Belongs to a Daniel Cord, registered out in Brooklyn. No priors, but get this. He's listed as warehouse manager for Venamera Logistics." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "And that's the company that distributes Volekaiv Privé's high-end imports. A new name. A new pressure point." Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. "Archie, you will go to Brooklyn. Find Mr. Cord, and take care not to mention the word remind. He will bring it up himself if he's the one who needs reminding." Venamera Logistics was buried in a warehouse complex on the edge of Red Hook, where Manhattan's gleam gives way to the stink of saltwater, diesel, and forgotten ambition. The building itself looked like it had been repurposed more times than a wine bottle used as a candlestick. Gray brick, industrial windows, and a security kiosk that hadn't been manned in years. Perfect setting for someone running quiet business under expensive labels. I found Daniel Cord in the loading bay behind the main structure, hunched over a clipboard, barking half-hearted instructions at a pair of guys moving wine crates off a truck with more enthusiasm than care. He was wiry, sharp-nosed, and dressed like a man who split his time evenly between spreadsheets and forklifts, rolled sleeves, khakis, and scuffed brown boots. The type you don't notice until he notices you. He did. I waited until the workers shuffled off, then approached casually, flashing a polite smile. Daniel Cord. He nodded, wary. Who's asking? Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe. A beat. His brow twitched slightly. That a winery? Nope. A detective. Ah, he said, flat. That's worse. He set the clipboard down and leaned against a crate marked champagne. Handle with care, though I doubted he handled anything in his life gently. His eyes scanned me like he was pricing out my coat and my motives. I heard you had a late-night visit with Marta Kellogg yesterday. I said, just curious if that was business, pleasure, or something less bubbly. She called me, he said, voice even. Wanted to talk. So I came. That's community spirit. What'd she want? He shrugged. Said someone had been poking around the distribution logs. She asked if I'd seen any unusual orders from Gregory Avery. And had you? No, Gregory's a perfectionist. The guy signs off on every bottle that leaves his line. Every cork, every seal. No room for funny business. But Marta thought there might have. Cord hesitated. She said something felt off. That's all. That's all. Asked if any of the recent shipments had been rerouted or tampered with. I told her no. I watched his hands. One of them was twitching against his thigh, fingers flexing slightly, like he wanted a cigarette or an exit. She mentioned a vial. I asked. Small, brown glass, copper cap, with a tag that said remind. His head snapped around so fast I almost smiled. No, he said too quickly. Never heard of it. Funny, I said. She seemed to think it was relevant. So did Florence Avery. So did Gregory, before he vanished. Cord pushed off the crate. Look, I don't know what this is, but if you're looking for someone running a scam, it's not me. I move bottles. I track invoices. I don't play games with antique threats. Antique threats, I repeated. That's an interesting phrase. He realized he'd slipped. It's just an expression, not one people use unless they've seen a few. His jaw flexed. What do you want from me? I tilted my head. Let's start with honesty. You were part of the Florence operation, weren't you? Back in Italy, not deep. Maybe just transport, labels, inventory fudging. He didn't deny it. I kept my head down, he said. I was young, hungry, thought it was harmless. Then Lazati died, and I ran. And Marta, she stayed. She always stays. I folded my arms. Then why see her now? He looked away. Because I thought it was happening again. I waited. She told me Gregory was acting strange. I told her if someone was setting up another forgery run, I didn't want any part of it. I've got a mortgage now. A mortgage now. A mortgage. But you still came, I said. She said it was bigger than the wine. Said it had to do with reminders. Old debts, old name. That word again. Remind. You know what it means? I asked. Cord hesitated. Back in Florence it was Lazati's word. He said everything we did, every label, every lie was just a way to remind the world that wine was about perception, that the taste didn't matter. Just the story. And now someone's using it to send a message. Looks that way. I let the silence stretch. Then I pulled out a folded photo, one I'd taken of the vial before sealing it in Wolfe's envelope. Cord looked at it for half a second, before flinching like it was lit. Where did you find that? In a wine crate. Gregory's stash. Florence found it. Hell, he muttered. Then it's already started. What has? He looked around like the walls might be listening, then leaned in. There's a second shipment coming in. Tomorrow. From Lisbon. Supposed to be standard Bordeaux, but it's not listed in the official manifest. Marta asked me to log it under a different vendor, and you said yes. I said I'd think about it. I put my hand on his shoulder, firm but not threatening. You're going to do better than that. You're going to give me the paperwork, the shipping container number, the whole. He nodded once, resigned. I'll send it tonight. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interrupting, fingers tented, his face unreadable. When I finished, he nodded once, gravely. Prepare the plant room, he said to Fritz through the intercom. We may have visitors tomorrow. I raised a brow. You expecting a wine shipment? I'm expecting someone to try delivering one, he said, and someone else to intercept it. I stood. So we're setting a trap. Wolfe reached for the vial on his desk, tapping it gently with one finger. We're setting a reminder. The next morning broke gray and slow, like the sky was too tired to commit to weather. Inside the brownstone, the mood was different, focused, anticipatory, almost surgical. Wolfe had issued one of his rare pre-breakfast orders. I was to reach out to Saul Panzer and Lon Cohen and coordinate quiet observation of the shipment arriving at Vinamera Logistics that afternoon. Fritz was to rearrange Wolfe's orchid schedule. And Wolfe himself, he didn't move a muscle more than necessary, but the air around him buzzed like he was conducting a symphony with nothing but his thoughts. By 11, the details were in place. Saul would shadow the Lisbon shipment from the moment it left the docks. Lon, with the help of a friend in customs, would monitor the manifest and flag any discrepancies between declared contents and actual crates. As for me, I was stationed at Vinamera's rear entrance, perched in a borrowed van with tinted windows and a bag of trail mix I had no intention of eating. At 12:48 p.m., the truck pulled in, marked with the logo of a mid-tier European exporter Wolfe had flagged as suspicious. Vignoble Farrell and C.A., the driver, bearded and bored, backed into the bay with practiced indifference. 3 men emerged from the warehouse, including Daniel Cord, clipboard in hand, moving with a bit more urgency than the day before. They exchanged brief words with the driver, then began unloading crate after crate, nothing out of place, at least not yet. At crate 14, Saul posed as a dock worker, made his move. A low whistle, a palm signal toward the lot, then a nod in my direction. That was our signal. The crate had arrived. The fake one, the one Wolfe suspected carried more than wine. By 2:15 the crate was inside, logged under a fake supplier, and placed discreetly near the back of the storage section, where only authorized staff could access it. And by 2:35 Marta Kellogg arrived, wearing dark glasses, a tailored trench coat, and a scarf that probably cost more than my rent. She entered through the service door. 5 minutes later, Daniel Cord followed. I gave it another 10, then stepped out of the van and made my way to the front door. The receptionist, a blonde with the blank, efficient look of someone trained not to notice anything illegal, gave me a tight smile. I'm here to see Marta, I said. She's not available. She will be, I replied, pushing past her. She rose from her chair, startled, but I was already halfway down the hall. A wrong move, maybe, but the clock was ticking, and I wasn't about to let whatever was in that crate disappear under a stack of fraudulent invoices. I found Marta and Cord in the back storeroom, standing over the crate. It was already open. Inside, nestled in straw, were wine bottles, but not Bordeaux. Not even close. Wolfe had guessed correctly. These were custom-labeled vintages, all bearing the same mark. Remind. The font was elegant, old world. The dates spanned decades. One bottle claimed to be a 1921 Petrus, another a 1934 Domaine de la Romanée Conti. Both impossible, both rare enough to set the wine world into convulsions. They turned as I entered. Cord looked like he'd just swallowed his resignation letter. Marta looked like she'd been waiting for me. You're early, she said. You're ambitious, I replied. Planning a comeback tour? This wasn't my doing, she said. Cord muttered. She's telling the truth. The crate wasn't packed by her. Then who? I asked. Marta closed the lid slowly. That's what we're about to find out. I pulled out my phone and made the call. 10 minutes later, Wolfe's voice filled the speaker. Archie, we've got the crate, I said. It's a forgery batch, all labeled Remind. High-end stuff. If even one of these got into circulation, it would crater someone's reputation. Precisely, Wolfe replied. And that, Mr. Goodwin, is the point. You think this was never about money? No. It's about destruction. Reputation. Precision sabotage. But more importantly, it's about guilt. Marta stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Guilt, she echoed. Mine. Yours was useful, Wolfe said through the speaker. But not central. Florence Avery, however, has spent 6 years waiting for someone to remind her what she did, and convince the world that her brother was no better. Cord frowned. You think Florence planted this? I think, Wolfe said, that Florence tried to end something she helped start. But she underestimated the lingering scent of her sins. She told us she was afraid, I said, that someone was using her past to blackmail Gregory. Indeed. But ask yourself, Archie, who found the vial, who delivered the emotional hook that began this drama? Marta whispered. She did. Wolfe continued, calm and cold. The crate was always meant to be discovered. The label, the name, Remind, was Florence's own conscience, turned into a weapon. She feared the past would return, so she made sure it did, on her terms. But Gregory saw it too soon. He ran, and now she's playing both victim and avenger. You think she's behind the Lisbon shipment? I asked. I think she arranged it to frame Marta, to wipe the slate, to bury everything. Perhaps even Gregory. A long silence followed. Then Marta said, Where is he then? That, Wolfe said, is what we must now determine. Mr. Goodwin, return. Bring the bottle labels and the crate. Miss Kellogg is to accompany you. What about Cord? Wolfe paused. He may remain for now, but warn him, if another shipment arrives under false papers, his next visitor will not be so civil. Cord nodded solemnly, and I took that as the closest thing to a promise he'd ever made. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe waited in his chair like a spider that had already spun the web, and just needed someone to trip over a single strand. Marta sat stiffly in the red chair, clutching one of the forged bottles like a relic. Miss Kellogg, Wolfe said, you are not the originator of this forgery, nor are you the primary manipulator, but you are complicit in its momentum. She nodded once. I didn't try to stop it. You didn't try to stop Florence, he corrected. You think she's behind all this? She asked. I think, Wolfe said, she is waiting to be caught. And right on cue, the phone rang. It was Florence Avery. Her voice was tight, brittle. She had something to confess. I think I know where Gregory is, she said, but you have to come alone. Just you, Mr. Wolfe. No police. No Archie. Impossible, Wolfe said. Then he may already be dead. The silence that followed Florence's ultimatum was the kind that makes clocks sound louder and air feel heavier. I stood by the phone, watching Wolfe's expression calcify into that particular look, half contempt, half calculation, that meant he was doing 13 things with his brain, none of which involved tolerating dramatics. Florence, he said, his voice low and exact. I am not in the habit of responding to threats, particularly from someone whose grasp on guilt and innocence is so perilously confused. There was a sharp exhale on the other end. I'm not threatening you, Mr. Wolfe. I'm trying to protect my brother before someone else gets to him. He is alive. I believe that, but only just. You claimed not to know his whereabouts, Wolfe said. Now suddenly, you do. I said I think I know, she corrected. Last night after you called, I remembered something. A location he mentioned a week ago during an argument. He said he needed somewhere quiet. Somewhere that didn't smell like regrets. I thought it was nonsense at the time. That is because you do not know how to listen, Wolfe said. Where? A small property we used to visit as children, upstate, near Cold Spring. Our family once owned a vineyard there, but it's long abandoned. Gregory kept the keys. He always liked the quiet. Address. She gave it. Wolfe's pen scratched once. You are to go nowhere, he said. Mr. Goodwin and Miss Kellogg will depart immediately. If you are lying, I'm not, she said. I only want this to end. Wolfe hung up without comment. Then he turned to me. Archie, you will drive. Take Miss Kellogg. Verify the brother's condition. If he is dead, call Inspector Kramer. If he is alive, bring him to me. I will not permit this imbecility to spiral further. Yes, sir, I said. I turned to Marta. You up for a road trip? She nodded, pale but resolute. I want answers as much as you do. We left the city just after 1. The drive took about 90 minutes, heading north through increasingly empty towns and long patches of woods that hadn't seen traffic since Eisenhower. Marta was silent most of the way, staring out the window like she was rehearsing some invisible dialogue with a ghost. You think she planted the crate? She asked finally. I think wolves usually write about things that smell wrong, I said. And this case reeks like spoiled Riesling. She's not a monster, Marta murmured. Just ashamed. And dangerous in the way the ashamed often are. The old Avery vineyard was exactly what Florence described. 20 acres of bramble-wrapped silence, a sagging house at the end of a gravel drive, and a barn that leaned left like it had made a personal decision to collapse. I parked near the porch. The air smelled like moss, mildew and distant wood smoke. No signs of life. I pulled my gun from the glove box. Not Wolfe's usual prescription, but I was in Archie Goodwin mode. Not Wolfe's valet, and motioned for Marta to stay behind me. We climbed the porch steps. The front door was slightly ajar. Gregory? I called. It's Archie Goodwin. Your sister sent us. No answer. I pushed the door open. The air inside was musty, but breathable. The interior had the feel of a place once loved, now neglected, furniture draped with white sheets, dust motes hanging in the shafts of gray light. We moved slowly. I checked each room, calling Gregory's name. Then I heard it, a faint cough from upstairs. I took the stairs 2 at a time. He was in the back bedroom, lying on a bare mattress with an empty thermos beside him and a half-finished bottle of scotch on the floor. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days, sunken cheeks, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. But he was alive. Mr. Avery, I said, crouching. You picked a lousy place to go dark. He blinked at me. Recognition took a moment to light. You're Wolfe's man. Correct. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't die until he's had a word with you. I needed to think, he muttered. Too much pressure. The crate, the bottle, Florence. Marta appeared behind me, her voice gentle. Gregory. It's Marta. You're safe now. He flinched but didn't recoil. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe if I left it would stop. I nodded. It hasn't. But you've got a choice now. Stay here and let other people write your story. Or come back and tell it yourself. He hesitated. Then nodded once. I helped him up, got him into the car. On the drive back he didn't say much. Marta sat in the back, eyes wet, quiet. We arrived at the brownstone just before dusk. Wolfe was in the office, of course. Gregory stumbled in under his own power and collapsed into the red chair like it was a confessional. Wolfe regarded him coolly. Mr. Avery, I do not like to be lied to, but I am marginally more tolerant of cowardice when followed by atonement. Speak. Gregory swallowed. I saw the files. I knew what Florence had done. I knew that if anyone found out it would ruin everything I'd built. Then the bottle appeared. Remind. Just that word. But it meant everything. I thought it was Marta. Then I thought it was Cord. Eventually I realized it was Florence. Wolfe grunted. Indeed. She was trying to purge it all, he said. The guilt, the history, the threat. She thought framing Marta would protect me, that she could confess quietly and no one else would get hurt. But she underestimated what a confession really costs. Wolfe stood. "Bring her," he said. "Now." I did. Florence arrived within the hour, looking more tired than triumphant. When she entered the office and saw her brother seated, alive and ashamed, she went very still. "You were supposed to stay away," she whispered. "You planted the vial," Wolfe said. "You arranged the Lisbon crate." She didn't deny it. "I had to. I needed to end it before it came back, before someone else pulled it open. If Marta had taken the fall, she could disappear again, and Gregory, he could start fresh, without me." "Phew," Wolfe said. "You underestimate the capacity of guilt to outlive the crime. Your solution was not justice. It was desperation." Florence sat, tears running silently down her face. Gregory said nothing. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, call Kramer. Have him come for the crate, the records and Miss Avery's statement." "Understood. And bring my beer. I need something clean on my tongue." As I headed to the kitchen, I heard Florence whisper to her brother, "I only wanted to remind you how much I loved you." And Gregory, without irony, replied, "I never forgot." Inspector Kramer arrived 40 minutes later, and he wasn't in a mood that suggested gratitude for the invitation. He stormed into the brownstone like he was expecting to find Wolfe surrounded by corpses and counterfeit wine, and was disappointed when all he found was one emotionally frayed heiress, a crate of fraudulent Bordeaux, and Wolfe in his usual position, seated, composed and unrepentantly rotund. "I got your message, Wolfe," Kramer growled, tossing his coat onto the nearest chair without asking. "And if this turns out to be another one of your clever games instead of an actual felony, I swear I'll leave you buried under so many affidavits you'll suffocate in legal parchment." Wolfe didn't blink. "I would find such a death disagreeable, Inspector. Fortunately, this matter involves sufficient illegality to justify your entire precinct." I handed Kramer the folder Wolfe had assembled, photographs of the forged bottles, Marta's and Daniel Cord's statements, Florence's written confession, and a copy of the Lisbon shipping manifest, all neatly tabbed and annotated in Wolfe's painstaking, practically pedantic handwriting. Kramer flipped through it, his jaw tightening. "This is legit?" he asked me. "As vintage as it gets," I said. "Florence Avery engineered the forgery delivery, planted false evidence, and attempted to redirect suspicion onto Marta Kellogg. You've got interstate fraud, tampering with import records, and accessory to fraud at a minimum, probably more, depending on how the labels were reproduced." Florence sat quietly on the sofa, her expression empty, her hands clasped in her lap like she was bracing for impact. She didn't look at Kramer, or her brother, or Wolfe, only at the floor, as if the grain of the wood might offer penance. "And the brother?" Kramer asked. Gregory sat across from her, looking worse than he had earlier, but stronger now that he was back on stable ground. He'd insisted on staying, out of some sense of shared consequence, or maybe shared grief. "He didn't participate," I said. "He was the intended beneficiary, but he ran the moment he understood what was happening. That's not criminal, just human." Kramer snorted. "Sometimes that's the worst kind." Wolfe folded his hands. "Miss Avery will cooperate. She will provide the names of the printer who produced the counterfeit labels, the courier who facilitated the Lisbon shipment, and the contact in Italy who still maintains remnants of the Luzzati network." Florence raised her head. "I will," she said softly. "I was trying to cauterize the wound. I see now that I only spread the infection." Kramer stared at her. "That poetic nonsense might impress a jury. It doesn't impress me." He turned back to Wolfe. "All right, I'll take her in. But if any part of this unravels, if even one link in this wine forgery chain disappears, I'll have your fat neck subpoenaed, so fast it'll take Fritz 3 hours to peel you out of that chair." Wolfe gave a small grunt. "I have no intention of moving, Inspector." "Good," Kramer snapped. "Don't." They left shortly after. Florence went without resistance. No cuffs, no drama, just resignation in her eyes, and the quiet tension of someone finally submitting to consequence. I watched her go and wondered if in some upside-down way that was the closest she'd get to redemption. Gregory remained. He sat in Wolfe's office for nearly an hour, speaking only once to Marta. "I blamed you," he said, "but I was just scared of what you reminded me of." "I'm sorry." She nodded, but didn't reply. When he finally rose to go, Wolfe spoke. "You must decide whether to rebuild your name or bury it. Either may suit you, but only one path permits sleep." Gregory gave a tired smile. "I'll let you know if I sleep." He left, and Marta followed. She paused at the door. "I don't know if Florence hated me, or just hated herself," she said, "but I hope the wine world forgets her." "No," Wolfe said quietly. "The wine world must remember. That is the only way it learns." When they were gone, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. I waited a beat before fetching his beer and placing it gently on the tray beside him. "Quite the vintage," I said. "Sabotage, forgery, misdirection. You didn't even need a body to make it interesting." He opened one eye. "There was a body." I blinked. "Florence?" "No," he said. "Her innocence and Gregory's peace. Both expired long before you arrived at that vineyard." I gave a half smile. "Not exactly cheerful." "No," he agreed, "but instructive. Fritz called us to dinner. Not long after, veil medallions in rosemary sauce, with a Chateau Lafite he'd been waiting to serve since the spring." Wolfe sniffed the cork with the reverence of a man communing with something sacred. He sipped, then nodded. "This," he said, "is real." And that was his closure. After dessert, I went to the office, poured myself a smaller glass, and scribbled the final lines in my notebook. Wolfe doesn't like repetition, but I do, so I'll say this again for the record. Some crimes happen with blood, some with poison, and some with paper, glass, and silence. This one began with a bottle that didn't belong. It ended with a name that never left. And all along, Wolfe knew. He always does. It was the morning after Florence Avery's quiet arrest, and the brownstone was unusually calm. The air had that particular flavor of aftermath, something between relief and disquiet, like a dinner party that ended just one course too late. Wolfe was in the plant rooms with Theodore, muttering in Latin to his recalcitrant Miltonias, and I was in the office typing up my final notes. The Lisbon shipment had been impounded, the forged bottles catalogued, and Florence was scheduled for arraignment the following day. Marta Kellogg had vanished from public view. No headlines, no dramatic farewells, just a neatly penned letter thanking Wolfe for his restraint and me for my patience, which I had no recollection of offering. As for Gregory Avery, he'd quietly resigned from his company and issued a public statement that managed to sound both dignified and evasive, a talent, I figured, he and his sister had shared. The phone rang just before noon. I answered. "Goodwin." It was Lon Cohen. "Tell Wolfe I've got the story in final draft. I've taken his notes. No mention of Miss Avery's name. Just a reference to an unnamed heiress implicated in a counterfeit wine plot. Marta's clean. So's Avery. Officially. You're only quoted once, but don't worry. You sound dashing." "I always do." "He'll get his copy this afternoon. Tell him thanks. If he hadn't dropped this in my lap, I'd be stuck chasing rumors about a missing cello in Brooklyn." I hung up, turned back to my desk, and flipped through my notes. 10 days ago, this whole thing started with a woman in mink walking through our front door and talking about cheap wine. Now we had a fraud conspiracy, a destroyed family legacy, and a confession that somehow managed to be both calculated and sincere. Wolfe entered shortly after noon, wearing the expression of a man who had just wrangled something beautiful from something stubborn. His orchids or the world. It was always one or the other. He settled into his chair, touched the bell for Fritz, and accepted his beer as if he'd earned it through combat. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "has our world returned to order?" "More or less," I said. "Florence is in custody. Gregory's on sabbatical. Marta's in hiding, Kramer's probably still yelling into a folder somewhere. Excellent. He took a sip. You neglected one detail. Which one? The bottle. I frowned. The vial. It's with the police. Or do you mean the Malbec that started it all? Wolfe's lips twitched. The latter. I crossed to the cabinet and retrieved it. The Bodega Los Robles. Still sealed. Still cheap. Still radiating the kind of mediocrity that Wolfe considered a personal insult. I set it on the desk between us. You really think Florence left this deliberately? I asked. As a clue? A signature? She did not place it for me, Wolfe said. She placed it for Gregory. It was an act of emotional punctuation. The bottle had no monetary value, no symbolic elegance. It was a wine that, to him, represented failure, sloppiness, a lapse in discernment, and she chose it precisely because it would wound him. Not a threat, a jab. Precisely. She wasn't warning him. She was shaming him. I looked at the bottle again and saw it differently. Less like a bad joke and more like a surgical cut. Not deep but deliberate, and the word remind. I asked, was that hers too? No, Wolfe said, settling deeper into his chair. That was Luzzati's, a final echo from Italy, picked up and repurposed by a woman who wanted to clean the past without confronting it. She believed that by reusing the word she could control its meaning. But words, Archie, are not obedient, they haunt. He closed his eyes. She should have chosen silence. I let that hang, for a moment, then stood and took the Malbec back to the cabinet. I didn't throw it out. Not yet. Some artifacts belong in a museum, even if only to remind you what not to open. The rest of the day passed quietly. Fritz prepared a late lunch, grilled trout with lemon dill butter, wild rice, and roasted asparagus. Wolfe ate slowly, methodically, pausing after each bite to savor and consider. By 3 o'clock he had settled in for his postprandial reading session, a 2-volume history of Italian wine frauds that had arrived by courier that morning. I was just about to sneak in a nap when the doorbell rang. It was Saul Panza. He didn't come often, unannounced, which meant something was still unfinished. Wolfe looked up. Mr. Panza. Saul stepped in, nodding. Just got confirmation. The label printer Florence used, he died 2 years ago. Stroke. The equipment's in storage. Someone else reproduced those labels. Someone, Wolfe repeated. With skill. Saul nodded. Too much skill. These weren't amateur copies. These were professional-level recreations. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. Wolfe steepled his fingers. That would suggest Florence did not act alone. Bingo. Do we know who? Saul pulled a small envelope from his coat and handed it to Wolfe. Inside was a photo, grainy, taken from surveillance footage. A man in his 40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes, standing beside Florence outside La Cave Privée. The timestamp was 2 weeks before she came to us. Name? Wolfe asked. Leandro Corsi. Former associate of Pietro Luzzati. Went dark after the Florence scandal. Resurfaced last year in the States. No direct business ties, but we have bank records connecting him to a dormant LLC tied to the wine club. Wolfe studied the photo. Then Miss Avery's confession was incomplete. Deliberately, Saul said. She gave you just enough. Wolfe closed the envelope and handed it back. Keep looking, quietly. If Mr. Corsi believes his co-conspirator has been sacrificed, he may either flee or retaliate. I'll keep eyes on both possibilities. Saul left as quietly as he'd come. Wolfe didn't speak for a while. Then he reached for his beer, lifted it with a small grunt and said, Human frailty is the most stubborn of vintages. No matter how you try to refine it, it ferments. I nodded. Still tastes bitter. Wolfe grunted. Then do not swallow it. I went to the window, looked out at the street, quiet, unhurried, normal. But down beneath that calm, I could still hear the clink of glass. The weight of secrets settling in crates no one would ever unpack. Another day, at the brownstone. Another case resolved. but not really over. Because in Nero Wolfe's world, the truth never finishes clean. It just decants, slowly, reluctantly, until the next glass is poured. It was 4 days later, when the last cork finally popped, and as usual Wolfe had been waiting for it with maddening patience. I'd been under the impression that the case was closed, at least in the administrative sense. Florence Avery had made her confession. Gregory had retreated into seclusion. The Lisbon crate was locked in a crime lab somewhere in Queens, and Marta Kellogg had ghosted out of Manhattan like she'd never existed. But Wolfe, of course, had kept one final card close to his chest, or rather, tucked under the orchid bench beside a modest pot of Cattleya perseviliana. The card, as it turned out, was Leandro Corsi. "You're sure?" I asked when Saul Panza confirmed Corsi's movements over the phone that morning. "He's still in the city?" "Very," Saul replied. "And more to the point, he's been visiting a particular locksmith in Midtown. Same one who serviced Le Cave Privé's tasting vault last year. Which means he still had a key, or wanted one. Bingo! That was all Wolfe needed to summon the final act. At 6:30 that evening, all the surviving players were gathered in the office. Florence, under supervised release and pale as vintage bone. Gregory, wary but sober. Marta, tight-lipped and trying not to look cornered. Daniel Cord, summoned by Wolfe's request, and too frightened of a subpoena to say no. And lastly, a reluctant Corsi, who arrived with the same clipped politeness of a man unsure whether he was being invited to dinner or indictment. Wolfe hadn't left his chair. He rarely does, but he looked different that evening. Not triumphant, not even smug, just resolute. There was something in his posture that said the work was finished, and now it was time for the judgment. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice slow, full, and utterly still. "I will speak. You will listen. If you interrupt, Mr. Goodwin will eject you, and Mr. Panza will ensure your return is unpleasant." That shut everyone up nicely. I have been asked, both by those in this room and by those with badges, to explain the root of this deception. So I should. He leaned back, eyes sweeping over the group. 6 years ago, in Florence, a criminal enterprise flourished, a forgery ring built around wine. It involved falsified labels, tampered bottles, and a network of transport and cover that required multiple languages and vanishing morals. It ended with the death of Pietro Luzzati and the collapse of the operation. Or so we thought. He turned to Florence. "You, Miss Avery, fled that life. You constructed a new one in Manhattan, centered on curated wine and selective truths. You believed the past was buried, but it was not. Mr. Corsi," he nodded at the man in the gray suit, "followed you here. Not to threaten, not at first, but to resume." Corsi shifted. "I did no such." Wolfe raised a hand. "Be silent," he continued. "You declined his offer, but you feared exposure. So when Gregory discovered the records files you had kept, perhaps as leverage, or perhaps as a misplaced attempt at control, you panicked. Rather than confront the past, you attempted to redirect it." He turned to Marta. "You, Miss Kellogg, were the perfect scapegoat. A sommelier with a tarnished reputation, known to both Gregory and the wine community. You could be blamed without consequence. To Cord. And you were the mechanism. You signed the false shipping logs, perhaps unaware, perhaps complicit. But your hands are stained, even if not red." Gregory spoke hoarse. "But what about the bottles? Why mark them? Remind." "That," Wolfe said, "was Miss Avery's final conceit. A symbol from the past. Luzzati's word, reborn as a talisman. She used it to control the narrative, to frighten you, to send a message without speaking aloud. But in doing so, she revealed her own fingerprint." He turned back to Florence. "You meant to save your brother, but guilt is not an eraser. It is a solvent." The room was still. Corsi cleared his throat. "You have no proof I produced the labels." "Pufui," Wolfe said. "The police do. The printer is in storage." "Yes, but your fingerprints are on the plates, and Mr. Panza has the locksmith's statement. And your recent wire transfer to a dummy LLC connected to the same forgery ring. Corsi paled. Leave now, Wolfe said, or Inspector Kramer will collect you with handcuffs. By the way, you're finished. Corsi stood, hesitated, and walked out without another word. No one stopped him, but no one needed to. Florence closed her eyes. I wanted to forget, she whispered. Wolfe replied with the weight of a closing door. Then you should never have reminded. Gregory stood. We're done here, he said, and gently touched his sister's shoulder. She flinched but didn't resist. They left together. Marta remained a moment longer. I'm going back to Italy, she said softly. I'll rebuild there. If that's still possible. Wolfe nodded. If you are honest, it will be. She offered a faint smile, then left. When the front door clicked shut, I looked at Wolfe. That's it? Yes, he said. The wine was counterfeit. The motives were not. He reached for his beer. I didn't stop him. So what now? I asked. He took a long sip, then exhaled. Now, we cleanse the palate. And just like that, the case of the wrong wine at the right time was over. It didn't end in gunfire or a body. It ended with a confession, a word, and a crate full of lies. But that's the thing about wine. You can fake the label. You can age the bottle. But the taste, that always tells the truth. That always tells the truth.